Welcome back to Left Anchor. I'm Alexei the Greek.
And I'm Ryan Cooper. Today we've got a special guest, Manu Saadia. Did I remember that correctly?
That'll work.
Yeah.
How about you tell Ryan one more time. Tell him how he should try it.
Manu Saadia. It's Hebrew.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I've been trying to get we're going to talk France today, so I was trying to get my head into the French mindset, but now we've got Hebrew names. You know, my poor blinkered American brain can barely handle English as it is. So, you know, we're doing a little workout here in the old brain parts. But anyway, thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure.
We wanted to have Manu on to talk French politics because you're originally from France. Is that correct?
Oh yes, born and raised in Paris.
Yeah, Gay Paris. And he's from France, but also the author of the book Trekonomics, which is, I believe, about the economics of Star Trek. If I may make that conclusion, but
that is correct.
So I think, you know, maybe just to start the discussion here, you know, France has been racked by protests and instability around the Yellow Vest protests. And I thought maybe you could just give us a little bit of background about, like, how they got started and, you know, what the sort of underlying grievance was there originally.
So the Yellow Vests are by law required. You're required by law to carry yellow vests in the trunk of your car in case of accident. And the Yellow Vest protest is very tied originally to issues that have to do with mobility and moving around. The inciting event in November was a rise in the diesel fuel tax. Believe it or not, in France, a lot of cars are still run on diesel, and that's a result of 1980s industrial policy, which favored diesel cars made by French car makers. So this protest started as a protest against the rising cost of filling up your tank. It was also tied to the fact that last year the Prime Minister decided to lower the speed limit on the rural roads from 90 kilometers per hour to 80 kilometers per hour. So that's, what is that? It's like 45 miles per hour?
Yeah, like 50, I think.
Yeah, from 50 to 45. The hope with that measure was that it would reduce mortality on the roads. And if you've been to France, you know that those little roads in the countryside are death traps, and that people who believe they know the place because they live there, take inconsiderate risks. But this was seen as kind of a punitive decree, an ukaz of some sort, and it sort of get the protest going, or at least the Facebook protest going, and then they started to organize on social media around these two issues, and it opened the door to more demands and to a much wider airing of grievances, which had been simmering for a very long time. And then, they started, so the Yellow Vest protesters started to occupy those roundabouts, les ronds-points, as they're called, roundabouts. So, in France, every little town, at the entrance of the little town, you have a roundabout instead of a big crossing. It's great public works. It's a place to display and to showcase the pride of your town. And it's a feature. It's everywhere. And so people started to gather there and to sort of occupy them. So we were a little bit, at least for some of the protesters, we were in that logic of occupation, which I found personally interesting. because people were, either honking or stopping by and, to show support or not. And this is a way to hold a public forum. So there was that. And then they started to demonstrate every Saturday in all the towns around France. And it's interesting. That too is interesting because the demonstration on Saturday tells you something about the sociology of who's demonstrating. Besides the infiltrated royalists and other anarchists, which are something else entirely. A lot of people who were demonstrating on Saturday because they have jobs, they have obligations. They're overwhelmingly lower middle class or to middle class, and they came to Paris quite often, went down the Champs-Élysées, and there were, the Vuitton stores and all the luxury stores were burnt at one point or another. There was some fighting. I mean, the police has been, but it's the French police, so you should expect that. Has been absolutely brutal in ways that is, I have no words. They're allowed to use these grenades that are basically, that have like, I think 20 grams of TNT in them, and they shoot them straight at the face of demonstrators. I mean, it's just people have lost eyes and hands and stuff like that. And granted, there were some elements in the demonstrations who were way more radical, both left and right. And but you would think that the French police would have known how to isolate these people. So there was this mass movement, and it has been going on since November. So there, as a matter of fact, today there were more demonstrations again.
Right. No breaks. There's been no weekend, I believe, since November where there was no. Right. It's been constant demonstrations at least every week.
Even during what is a sacrosanct period in France, like the winter holidays. Everybody goes on holidays or stays off work, and people have been demonstrating. I'm very curious to see if it's going to continue until the summer when people leave for summer vacation. The government the government did something in reaction, which was to create to initiate what they called the Grand Débat, great debate. So this is almost like 1789, where they had all these cahiers de doléances. So in 1789, all the people from France were asked to write down or to have someone write on their behalf their grievances for the king and for the king and the regime. And so this is something like that. Something like that happened for the past 3 months. Mm-hmm. And now Macron has come up, they got a lot of people summarizing all the contributions, which were both public and online. And now Macron has, given his conclusions and his proposals.
Before we get to that, I think, because we have so much to talk about, before we get to this very interesting procedure that in a very democratic way that goes back through the history for years to give to the ruling class kind of a way to negotiate with the people and appease them. Maybe we start even further back with the demands and suss out even more about what the movement is really concerned with and why, going back not just Macron, but how he is maybe the kind of encapsulating spark to a movement that's really been concerned with the way that capitalism has harmed so many people in the last 20 years or so, right? So perhaps we back up a little bit, and even little things like the new law about reducing, the speed limits along with the fuel tax, both putatively about climate change, but ignoring the harms that redound and the costs that redound to certain populations in France, right? Because of course, what capitalism has done, for example, has made people who are in the rural areas, with kind of, as some of the readings we did for today suggested, the Walmartization of capitalism has made people have to drive farther and farther away from their rural towns to get services, to do various things, and so time is money for people that have hourly wages. countries, and cost has, I mean, for the fuel taxes for some people were greater in a year than their income tax. So these things at once are treating a global disaster by bearing the costs on people who have been forced to get diesel engines and so forth, right? So maybe we can suss out even more about why they're so angry, and then we can go to if Macron and this process is ameliorating their concerns and where to go from there.
I think there's setting aside the issue of capitalism, which looms large behind all this. You have endogenous dynamics at play here with France. So of course, that doesn't escape the rearrangements of capitalism in the past 40 years. But what seems to have happened in the past 40 years is this bifurcation between towns that are connected to global networks of production and exchange, and the countryside, which seems to have lagged behind in that respect. So there is that. Then also, one thing that strikes me, and sort of you never quite see it in the discussions online or in newspapers and all that, is that mass unemployment has been a fact of life in France since the 1970s. I don't remember a year. I was born in 1972. I don't remember a year when there was not mass unemployment in France. And obviously, the unemployed in France of the 1980s are not the same unemployed as those of today. So even though things have really changed and improved on some level for some in France, it seems that there's this rolling crisis of unemployment. And now it's, mostly affecting the part of France that is on the line. If you draw a line from Luxembourg all the way to Biarritz, so the southwest corner, and to the right, to the east, you have these disaffected regions, the Massif Central, so the central part of France, which is very rural and struggling, and all the agricultural towns in the east and the north. And this used to be the industrial base of France. And now the west of that line is where most of the dynamism has happened. And it's kind of an effect. I don't want to say hysteresis, but there is kind of a reason for that. The Brittany, for instance, was incredibly poor and underdeveloped. And starting in the 70s, the French state massively invested in the western part of France to sort of counterbalance and find a new equilibrium. And so these investments have paid off. You do have high-speed rail train all the way to Brest. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, we'd go to Brest because part of my family is from there. It was, some people didn't have bathrooms. Now it's, one of the most dynamic area in France. So these shifts, which were, driven by policy in part, have affected the south. Affected the east of that line. The south of France, really, the part, the Riviera, kind of, from Nice to Marseille. Marseille is its own thing, but otherwise, that part of the south that's on the Mediterranean is doing relatively fine. Because of the proximity to other countries, and I think a long history rooted in exchange and fishing also. And also the fact that a lot of people want to live there because it's nice, like California. So that's that. There's this the weight of geography and of social geographies cannot be discounted in what happened. And these are things, obviously, that will take a very long time to resolve, one way or the other. Even if the state decided to put all its weight behind reinvesting in these territories, it took 30 years for Brittany to get there. So, we're not talking about something that will happen overnight or that can be easily assuaged or easily fixed with measures announced, by the president. Like, this is not
that simple. It's not that simple, yeah.
No, it's the weight of history. So there's that. So these are the endogenous logic. And I would say, we're back to this thing where the countryside really, that's what struck a lot of people in the cities. I'm thinking of my friends in particular. They're like, these people hate us. They hate the cities, the big cities. And I guess my friends are like, they're academics and hipsters, so they're the sort of the cultural precariat kind of. So so they're like, these people hate us. I understand, but they hate us. It's very strange.
Is there association between sorry, Rand, just very quickly, between the yellow vests and people that need a car, so that they're the people in Paris don't so much feel a part of the movement, and yet
no.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. If you're Parisian, like if you have a car, you're really
strange.
You're really dumb, or you're really dumb.
Right. Okay.
Or you want to show off, So but there are in Paris, it's a big issue because a lot of people come to Paris to work and they use their car. People from the suburbs, and they use their cars, and their cars use diesel. And Paris is one of the most polluted city in the world as a result.
This may be worth a little context on the diesel thing, which has been an obsession in Europe for a long time. That
clean diesel.
Yeah, back in. Correct me if I'm wrong by this, but like back in the 80s, Europeans started getting concerned about climate change, emissions, trying to make society more efficient and so forth. And diesel does get better mileage than gasoline.
It wasn't climate change. It was the cost of gasoline.
Right. Okay. Well,
so they were like, yeah, diesel is more efficient, the diesel engine, whatever. So let's do that.
But
we will import less oil.
Yeah, but it also there's the emissions of particulate and nitrous oxide pollution is much worse than ozone, and so now they're stuck with this huge fleet of diesel cars, which are just awful for the environment, and now this was a thing with Volkswagen, right, where they were rigging the tests, right, to make it whenever
it's testing, not just Volkswagen, it's Renault, it's Peugeot, like they all fake the tests.
Diesel's just no good, and and it seems now that like the thing that you should do is just go straight for electric, like don't even bother going for gasoline. But you have all these people who made the investment according to the social contract of the age, and now it's like, we got to pay more for our diesel.
It's worse than that. It's like our diesel cars are worth nothing now.
That's right. The cars themselves, they can't sell the cars.
And it's a big investment, and suddenly it has lost most of its value.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of anger about that.
Yeah.
Right. It's funny because I read in the one of the articles about the average wealth of the yellow vest person. The average person's age 45, but it's suggested that they're not the poorest of the poor because they on average they own a car. 85% own a car, except their car is worthless and they need it to get to work and they can't afford the gas, right, or the diesel.
And switching to electric is a big investment, and the state has put in place all sorts of incentives and rebates, and hopefully this thing will slowly work out. But the French, I don't know if it's like Americans, but there's this thing where people are really attached for economic reasons to the cars they own, but also, there's this, the culture around the car is hard to root out. But I guess, if there are no more means of public transportation, what can you do? It used to be that the French rail system would go to all these little villages and lose a lot of money on these, barely used lines, but it was public service, service public as we call it. And under European directives, the SNCF, so the national rail company, has to forego most of the subsidies and must be open to competition by the late 2020s. So this is what's going on here as well.
The other part of the equation we haven't mentioned yet is that Macron pushed a big. Correct me if I'm wrong. He got rid of the wealth tax in France, correct? Which is like a 1% tax on wealth over some size.
Like the richest 365,000 families or something like that.
Yeah, but like the way he changed it is was supposedly smart. I mean, he tried to make it sound like smart, so it was not going. The wealth tax was on all income. Bam, flat, all income, do it. Now it's been changed to only income from real estate. So to supposedly incentivize people to invest more.
Yeah.
So like now you're not going to pay the wealth tax on the income you derive from capital, only from immobile capital or from non-productive capital. So
in effect, it was a massive tax cut for the rich, right? I mean, in terms of just like distributional effect, right? Well, at the same time, he's jacking up taxes on people who have to drive around, in rural areas.
That was the perception. In reality, the rich people in France are well advised by lots of lawyers and stuff like that. And so the actual receipts from the wealth tax were, if I remember, it was 3.5 billion euros. So to give you a sense of a scale, the French budget is 300 billion. So it was not inconsequential money, but it wasn't something that had a fundamental redistributive impact.
It's more symbolic.
It had been lowered. Yeah, it was symbolic. But symbols do matter tremendously for the French.
Of course.
I would say the idea of equality, or at least équité, is, if not equality, equity, is something that, everybody has to pay their fair share.
Fairness. And there must be a reason, because if the analysis you gave so well shows how kind of geographically situated the harm is, then that doesn't explain why so much of the country is behind or supportive of this movement, because I think the polling shows tremendous support, not just in these areas where people, right, are harmed.
I remember seeing a poll in December, so in the, at the height of the movement, I think about 75% to 80% of people were behind the movement because they thought it was legitimate. The interesting part was that the support, I think, was crystallized precisely because of the unfairness of the situation. Even though in terms of real numbers, we need a much bigger wealth tax in France than what was, it had been chipped away gradually. The unfairness is really what ticked off people. And honestly, the deafness, I would say, of the government. So that's something that this is something significant, I believe.
So Macron has a sort of program that he's been pushing, both as president and then previously, right? He was the economics minister, or the finance minister of the in the Hollande government, and they passed something, right, called I think they called it the Macron bill, right, in 2015. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about what that did and sort of what his, aside from taxes and diesel taxes, what was the sort of general orientation of that?
I mean, one of the things he tried to pass during his tenure as finance minister was a liberalization of all sorts of little labor laws. But that bill is most well known because of what they call the Macron bus, so the Macron buses, because he opened up transportation to private companies in the countryside. So, instead of the train, now you could have private companies bidding to take people from one place to the other and, make money off of that, and with some subsidies from the government, precisely to reduce or to cushion the impact of the retreat from the rail company. So the Macron buses had their time in the sun. I would say it now it's like it turned out to be a non-viable financially for a lot of those private companies. Imagine that. There's a reason why we treat transportation as a public good. So yes, so that's what one of the most significant thing it did as a candidate, and that's what I find really funny or ironic. I would say he ran as neither left nor right, or more precisely, and right and left. That was his big thing. I'm both right and left.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the movement against him, this mass movement against him, is both right and left. So there's this mirror effect right here that I find is historically significant and portentous. This was basically people massively saying that they don't want what he's giving them. The problem is that it's not clear what all these people want because they're both left and right. So the left part of the movement was like, we need, more public transportation, we need more taxes on the rich, and we need to have massive state subsidies to transition from diesel cars to something else. So that was on the left side. On the right side, it's people who are more petit commerce, so, small business owners and, struggling to a certain extent in the countryside and who want, fewer taxes, more, what they call the RIC, so Référendum d'Initiative Citoyenne. So like sort of, having propositions like in California or in some states in the US where if you get enough signatures, this or that law will be voted on in a referendum. And I was looking at that and I was like, what it does in California? It's not good. Like, this is not necessarily something that, and besides it's going to, make a lot of consultants make money. So
yeah.
It doesn't do what you think it does. But there's this sense of, wanting direct populist democracy in a way that might have unforeseen consequences.
Well, sure. There's problems with every form of politics.
Yes.
It seems that the current problem is that the promise of technocratic expertise has failed the right and the left constituents, right? Like you have people who both thought, oh, maybe this is magic. Maybe this guy he's a philosopher. He can tell us about, post-structuralist, postmodern philosophers in depth. And it's just like the Mayor Pete over here in the States, right? He's
Mayor Pete.
Exactly. Who's so smart. He's just so smart, and if he comes up with the best policies, then he can address all of our disparate needs. And so that probably explains that the failure of that is across the spectrum of political interests and ideology, right?
But I would say, I get animated about this because
we like that here. We like it. And I talk with my hands too. I'm Greek, so it's good. I like it.
I'm half Israeli. That's what's going on here.
It's beautiful.
What really gets me mad here, it's that there's this meme in France. It's been going on for so long of declinism, and it's because of the immigrants, or it's because of this or that, and there's like so many books every year. There's like tons of literature. There's Michel Houellebecq talking about the decline of France. Eternal France is on the fritz or whatever. When you look at the numbers, I mean. I was looking at a chart in The Economist last week, and France is among the top of the top, like top 3 in redistributive policies. We have the best healthcare system in the world. Public transportation is excellent. So the declinism really makes me mad because things are not that dire. They're bad for some people in France, and they should be addressed. But the thing is that what we know, the power of the French state can address these problems, and has in the past. And I think, some people get really mad, like me, but I think others get really mad at the fact that things could have been done in a much better way, and it would not have taken that much. And it's kind of it's. I remember this during the movement. So it was in December, maybe late November. The Minister of Health went on TV, and because some of the demands of the demonstrators was we want hospitals back in the countryside, and there's this policy right now to centralize hospitals because some of the more advanced medicine kind of only works at scale if you want to keep it cheap. You cannot have IRM and scanners and super advanced immunotherapy, which is free in France. Everything is free. You cannot have that at scale at the cost we're getting it if every little hospital has a maternity. But then if the hospital doesn't have if your local little hospital doesn't have a maternity, you need to be able to get to the other one.
Sure.
So the Minister of Health was addressing these questions which are in a sense the question of territorial allocation of limited resources. And she said, and she was on TV, and she's not a politician. And it's funny because I went to school with her brother, and I know her. And she doesn't know me anymore, but it's because Paris is very small. And she was like, I don't understand why people are so angry. We have the best healthcare system in the world, and we have the best social safety net in the world. So maybe she was a little hyperbolic, but close. And so it's not as bad. That's what I'm saying. And it can be addressed with good policy. It's not, there are limits to the policies that can be implemented because of Europe. But I think, the transportation issue, for instance, could be addressed with a more forceful stance in the European Commission. It's really enraging. That's what I'm saying, because I think the people who demonstrated were right to demonstrate, and it's really enraging that it got to that because it didn't have to.
Right. Now, so because it strikes me. Look, obviously, France is, even those who are suffering in some sense, if you make it relative, say, in Greece, of course, we have a Great Depression, and we're taking hundreds of thousands of refugees, and it's a different situation.
Yes.
And then at the same time, in the United States, which has even more wealth, is not doing what it should for its people in the way that France does, in the redistributive way. And so there's both in terms of its relative power and wealth, it's much higher than many, and it's also doing more for those on the lower echelons of the economic stratum and so forth. But as we know, inequality, whether it's, look, Trump got elected not from the poorest of the poor, not even in those places that were swing states. Those were people who had the kind of the wages of whiteness problem, who were angry that their whiteness was not getting them as much as it used to, and still felt a loss. And so there can be a real sense of loss that's even just on the left, actually, that's people expect more when the rich are getting richer, as Piketty shows even in France, right? The wealthier are doing much, much better, relatively speaking, even in this very generous welfare state. And so there is an indignation that is because of, like, as you said, the equity or the unfairness is legitimate in the face of this growing wealth at the very top.
I think what's interesting also is we're talking about I don't want to say a revolution, but we're talking about a mass movement of high expectations that have been dashed. What struck me also about the movement is that no people of, a shade darker than white seem to have taken part in this. And I'm trying to put this in diplomatic terms. The yellow vests were overwhelmingly Français dans France, Français de souche, as they say, like rooted French, or, something like that. France profonde, that's been the deep France. France profonde, that's been the vocabulary for this in a long while. Had any, sons and daughters or grandsons and granddaughters of immigrants taken part in the demonstrations, especially the looting and burning in Paris, maybe the government would have been happy because they could have said, "Oh, it's not, it's
Sure.
these people."
Sure.
But these people, quote unquote, actually didn't take part in any of that because it seems that spontaneously they concluded that there was nothing in it for them. This is something that I find really remarkable. And, in France, we don't want to talk about race because race doesn't exist in France. So racism exists, but not race. It's an interesting construct. So, but it's remarkable that the banlieue who were demonstrating in 2005, there was like a month of rioting and burning cars and burning houses. In 2005, it was brutally repressed. There was some kind of plan put in place to, inject some more money in there. It was when Sarkozy was Minister of the Interior. But these were riots. These were like riots of real poverty and abandoned. And they did not take part this time. And it did not spread to the banlieue. And I think that's remarkable.
What's your analysis?
I don't know what it means.
Okay, yeah, you're not sure why.
It seems that, well, for one, it's okay. Precarious employment is the lot of people in the banlieue, but as it is becoming the lot of people in the countryside. And it seems that, but maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's atmospheric, I'm not entirely sure, but there was a sense of these people on the periphery feeling that they were being treated like banlieue people, maybe. Maybe there was a hint of, we're not like these people, we deserve more. Maybe there was a hint of that. So there was that. And then there was the fact that the initial Gilets jaunes or Yellow Vest movement, so blocking life in one place or another so as to get some kind of settlement from the government. At first, there were movements like these in the territoire d'outre-mer, so in abroad France or ultramarine France, so in the former colonies, and there was one in Guyane a year before the Yellow Vests, during the presidential election, and they basically blocked off the one big road there, and they waited for €1 billion from the government to ensure safety, and that worked. So this is something I find quite strange, because the racial politics of the Yellow Vest movement has not been discussed that much. I still don't quite have a handle on it, but I think it should be noted and put out there in the discussion. Maybe some people have said maybe it is the white precariat, rural precariat in France. Maybe and maybe some people even said that maybe that's why it felt more legitimate and it felt okay to support it for 80% of the population. Maybe. And maybe that's why actually some stuff is going to come out of this, because it's France profonde and it's deep France, and these are people who vote. I don't know.
So I want to go back just a little bit to Macron's policy reforms. So in 2015, they do a big labor market liberalization bill, and the stereotype of the French worker, it's just like, 35 hours a week, and everyone gets a mandatory unfiltered cigarette smoke break every 2 hours, and it's just like a bunch of lazy, entitled people who don't like to work.
That is so not true.
No,
the
of course,
French workers are among the most productive in the world. They just don't want to work for the man.
Yeah, So I was going to say you do make, like Piketty had a good post about this, where I was looking at GDP per hour worked, and what are the most productive economies in the world? United States, Germany, and France. They're both basically tied. All three basically tied. So the French economy is really good. Like, it has some structural problems, but it's like cutting edge, best in the world. And nevertheless, there's this stereotype that the French economy is overregulated that I think is shared among like the Macron circle. And the idea is that you can unlock some potential by doing stuff like making the capital wealth tax or whatever more efficient, or, loosening some regulations on this or that. But the result of that has been basically just a wet fart. After the recession, I'm just looking at a chart of France's annual GDP growth, and it crested 2% in 2011, basically and went almost into nothing in 2013, bumping around at 1% for 2014 to 2017. Briefly crested 2% again in late 2018. Now it's back down, headed towards 1% again. So
it's not lowering the wealth tax that's going to change that.
Yeah, right. And like the basic bargain of, of neoliberalism, and this sort of like reform agenda is that, well, we do these things which are sort of like unequal and are like, removing regulations and stuff that make people's lives more convenient or easier, but we get more wealth as a result. That's the sort of golden straitjacket logic, but it's just not panning out at all. Do you think that has anything to do with the reaction to Macron? It's like you're just you're giving away the store for nothing?
It's to be fair, this has been going on for a long time. So it's under Hollande, under Sarkozy. Sarkozy was elected with with the sort of injunction to work more to get more. Travailler plus pour gagner plus. And what happened? I mean, okay, there was 2008, so I guess that's what happened. But it's just not panning out for many reasons that I think also are tied to the fact that France is in lockstep with Germany. And so there's no slack for the monetary policy whatsoever, but it hasn't been since the 70s and the European monetary system. So it seems that the bargain, we're going back to this question of mass unemployment. There is this bargain that growth is going to be middling, unemployment is going to be high, but benefits will help manage this. And we're going to chug along, and in the intervening time, we're going to try to lower taxes. Macron's policy is funny because his answer to everything seems to be let's lower taxes. It's no, but like I'm saying that as a joke, but their analysis of what they got from this massive 3 months great debate throughout France is we need to lower taxes. Well, that's not quite what people were asking for. They said we want lower taxes on the bottom 50, something like that, and we want higher taxes on the top 1%.
It's who bears the cost, right? It's who bears the cost, and that's the fundamental thing that somehow neoliberals are very good at avoiding understanding that problem, right?
No, I think they understand it perfectly, but they are ideologically committed to the fact that we know better. I mean, Macron probably thinks that the wealth creators should be, and that was pretty much what he said when he gathered all these CEOs from all over the world last year, and was like, France is open for business. We're here. We want to do business. There's and it's kind of interesting because the French economy, again, as Ryan mentioned, like it's not that bad. There are great multinational export companies. The equivalent, like Americans are very good at tech, and the big tech companies, the big American tech companies, and the French, it's Gucci, which is owned by a French company. It's Louis Vuitton, it's Hermes. It's the luxury thing, and luxury and airplanes, and it's doing very well. Except, it's how should I say? To do very well, you should not employ a lot of people, and you should sell products that have 80 or to 90% gross margin.
Right,
so that's what we're talking about.
And help me here, because I did my best to read in French these wonderful sociological studies, right? And so I see purchasing power came up a lot as something that has been declining as a problem.
Yes.
And then I noticed also this kind of cleavage among the working class. It's not the simple stratification of upper, middle, lower, right? There's the intersectionality of it. Depends if you're a woman, if you're an immigrant, if you don't have a diploma, right? These things really can affect how you do even within a given class.
And I think also where you come from, like the geography is fundamental.
Yeah.
If like me, like me and my friends, we grew up in the center of Paris, you have to be a fuck up like me. Sorry, you have to be somebody like me to actually, end up in the U.S. and not part of the action.
It takes a wonderful fuck up though to write a book on Star Trek economics. Come on, that's amazing.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you. But the friends back home were not amused because they are serious. But what I'm saying is like, I grew up in this place where I know some people who are like in the upper echelons of the government, and then they were my school friends. And because Paris is very tiny and Paris rules. So if you're, and I'm the son of, sort of like petty bourgeois psychoanalysts. So it's not like we were any kind of wealthy or anything, but by virtue of being in Paris, I went to the best schools in France and I stumbled into them. And that's,
I know what you mean. Exactly. I'm in Athens. I'm friends with somebody who went to school with Alexei Tsipras, just because it's so small that everyone knows everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of these things where, so you have all these, splits in the French working class, which, are exploited by various operators, including, Marine Le Pen and the Front National Front, whatever their name is now. And then you have the geographic issue, which I think came to the fore and really fully formed and in its full potency in the Yellow Vest movement. Because if you're born in Clermont-Ferrand, unless you're the son of the upper, not even upper class, I would say, if you're the son of a traveling state civil servant, unless you're that, it's gonna be tough to actually break into the thing. Which, by the way, is kind of funny because Macron himself, he's the son of dentists from Amiens, so it's like he's a Flaubert character. He's like, no, I mean, he really is. That's why he's so eager, because he's even more, he has to be more than if he were Parisian, he wouldn't be like that because he'd be Parisian. So
he's like Obama.
Yes, in a way. Yeah, I mean, he would love that comparison, man.
He's an outsider who the like 10% of people that are from the outside of the social like escalator who did manage to climb onto it, and then therefore think that because they did that, anybody could do it, and I earned what I got.
I mean, he's not exactly working class. He's like petty bourgeois, provincial petty bourgeois, but
just like Obama.
Yes. Well, Hawaii is nice, or nicer than Amiens, I would say. Although, Obama's mother was an academic, and she was an anthropologist, so there's something there that's a little different from the pharmacist or the very Flaubert notable dentist from the small town in France. But Macron, yes, he's that kind of weird product. I would note that in his proposals that he just came up with was to break up the ENA, so the École Nationale d'Administration, the ENA, which is the school, the school of administration where all, most or if not all of France's high civil servants and CEOs go to. François Hollande, the former president, was a énarque. I don't know how many prime ministers went there, but I think most of them, including the current one. Macron went to ENA, even though he took a circuitous route to it. Sarkozy was an exception; he didn't go to ENA, but Chirac went to ENA. So Macron wants to kind of break it up. So he has named somebody to do a report because they're gonna have to find a way to break it up. And the ENA is is a beautiful idea. It was De Gaulle and Maurice Thorez Maurice Thorez, chief of the Central Committee of the French Communist Party. At the end of the war, they sort of said we need to have an institution where civil servants will be formed outside of partisan boundaries so that we can modernize France and in the spirit of the resistance and this sort of great idea of reconstruction. So that's where ENA really got its start in 1945. And then as things went on, it turned out, mostly it's not the sons of workers who end up at ENA. It's the sons of people who went to ENA, and it's mostly Parisians. And they become ministers and they become chiefs of staff. And then once they're done with that, they go to lead blue chip French companies. And it's a little endogamous, to use a nice term. But yeah, I mean, like everybody in the French elite, everybody knows each other. And everybody is sort of like... they do have their own little fights, but in the end, I think esprit de corps, so the mentality of the closeness of it all makes it,
Is that what's really being objected to from the left and the right? Maybe this insider-outsider contrast that maybe...
Yes, these are the insiders.
Yeah, and you suggested, interestingly, that maybe we didn't have to have these movements because that everything is pretty good generally. They didn't have to mess it up in such a way as to get this response. But maybe because they did, there won't be satisfaction even if they do the right policies. There seems to be a fundamental objection to the insider elite rule, which has worked in many ways over the years, but maybe that's the fundamental threat now that people...
I think you're also pointing out to a fundamental problem or contradiction, is that these sort of elites in France, which are extremely well educated, ENA is fantastic. But the problem is they sort of lose touch with the people. And I don't want to sound I don't want to sound like a Trotskyist here, but they do lose contact with their roots and with the way things are. And they tend to view society in very instrumental terms. And like we're moving around big objects and shuffling around. And it's the great game of power. Right. And so it's the technocrat. Yes. It's the technocrat mentality. And they're doing this. A lot of them are very dedicated. And they're doing this out of a sense of, some of them become very wealthy. Many others, like they stay for their whole life in the service of the state.
Out of duty, yes.
There is still a certain sense of civicism and a love for the Republic. And one of the things that they've tried to do at Sciences Po and ENA in the past 15 years is to actually bring in people from the banlieue, so non-traditional profiles, into the fold. And there's so much talent there and so many kids there who want to take part and to help and to serve. And I'm not talking about, the army. I'm talking about really being in the machinery of the state and helping make things better. So there are a lot of people who believe in that, genuinely. I believe in it. I don't take part in it, but I do still believe in it. And...
But there's a difference between service by people who believe the neoliberal line versus like the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes, who fundamentally are very, very smart and educated also, but fundamentally see the danger of such a thinking, right?
There was a lot of Trotskyists who went into l'ENA. No, it's not a joke. Lionel Jospin, so one of the best prime ministers France has had in the past 30 years, he went to ENA as a Trotskyist, doing entrism. And then he became a reformist because life happens, I suppose. But a lot of the top guys in the French Socialist Party were former Trotskyists of a very special splinter of the Fourth International, so their own thing. And they all knew each other. Mélenchon is one of them. So the leader of La France Insoumise, so the sort of like left populist French leader, who has a great command of the language. I really like the way he uses language. he's a Trotsky. He used to be a Trotskyist, of the same, persuasion as Jospin and a few others. So some people actually went as revolutionaries into the machinery of the state to take it over, and they got taken over.
Yeah,
it's always the danger.
You mentioned the Front National or Marine Le Pen,
whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Yes.
When I think about the problems with France's economic problems, it seems to me, looking from outside, the overwhelmingly biggest one is that it's part of the Eurozone, and the Eurozone is in big trouble.
Yes.
I'm looking at just a graph of USA versus Eurozone real GDP growth from 2008 to 2018, and if you index it to 2008 is 100, the USA, which has not been doing that well, but we're up to 117% of our 2008 GDP. The Eurozone is at 107%. So
wow. That's very small. Well, how big was the drop, though? I mean, that's because we're like climbing back from the deep hole. The hole was more shallow in Europe, correct? Or maybe I'm wrong. It was as bad.
It was a bit worse, but the problem really is that recovery has been consistently worse. So the points diverge, and basically the upshot is that the Eurozone is doing much, much, much worse than the United States in terms of keeping its economy up to full capacity. And I think most of that is...
and the response of Macron is like, lower taxes.
Yeah. So and what if you're running France, I think, what I would try
what else do you have?
Is a big old Keynesian stimulus and, jack up your taxes on the rich a bit, maybe to try to shift some income down the ladder. But you can't do that type of thing. You can't do big borrow and spend stuff under the Eurozone rules because Germany will come unglued.
You know who would need that too? Germany, because their infrastructure is crumbling.
Absolutely.
And they have ahead of them, they have a big wall of demography. And by 2030, it's very possible that France will overtake Germany in terms of population. So suddenly we're going to see who's boss.
And
no, but I mean, but like right now it's the Ordo liberals in Germany who are the boss.
Yeah.
So,
I guess
as the Greeks say, as the Greek know.
My question is, do you see a sort of a Euroscepticism fueling this type of thing? To think like we need France for French deep French people or what however you call them, but we need to get out from under the thumb of these European bureaucrats so that we can determine our own sovereign destiny.
Oh, the size of the banana. Yes. I mean, no, but like what you've seen in Britain is interesting. And I think, the European Commission has used that as a cudgel. But it's not just that. Like the reality is, if you want to disentangle yourself from Europe, whoa, good luck, because it's really, really complicated.
Yeah.
And England, by the way, was not part of the Eurozone, so it was not. So it was supposedly less complicated. There are two conflicting or analyses or political analyses about this. Strategic. You have on the one hand the Mélenchon very left people who say we need to get out of Europe and under the thumb of the Germans. So sometimes it's inelegantly couched in somewhat, in that rhetoric of the Germans are ruling us. And you have the more moderate left who say we need to reform Europe from the inside. And that sounds really great, but I don't know how you do that. It's safe of, having every country in Europe being left-wing and nominating a commission that is not so ideologically committed to liberal, competition and all that. Which, by the way, because of the commission, we do have, for €20, you get internet, 500 channels, and unlimited data, because like they actually believe in their stuff, like they actually believe in it, so they force competition.
Damn, that's
monopolies
cheap.
But it's funny, because it's like natural competition, like they really believe in that, so they force it. It's not like natural monopolies in the US. It is very cheap. It's weird.
Just as a point of reference, my internet, no TV, no phone lines or anything, costs $60 for kind of
it's like
shitty
mine.
service.
And that doesn't include free, what do you call that? Mobile data. Like these are all bundled. So.
Oh, Christ.
I know. I know it's nice. What am I doing here?
What am I doing here?
Me too. Let's go.
but you see the problem. Like it's you do have like a few things that are very good, and also food safety. So the size of the banana is actually a matter of food safety. But reforming Europe from the inside is going to take some kind of transnational mass movement.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's interesting because Europe was hailed as the sort of the next best thing. It was the utopia of the reformist left after the French Socialist Party in '83 abandoned Keynesian economics. They put all their chips on Europe and the construction of Europe and making Europe into this sort of Star Trek kind of entity. And I'm not saying that lightly. It's actually, like the long-term idea is to have this sort of federated bloc of people of all nationalities and culture. And the only thing where we'll get really mad at each other is soccer. And that's, but I don't know how you reform. I mean, I don't know what does it mean to reform Europe. I don't know. I don't know if it's abandoning the euro. I think, I've had some exchanges about this with a lot of people, and, serious economists think it was a dreadful idea and it was dreadfully implemented. But criticizing the economics doesn't matter. It was a matter of politics. This was political. It was to get the Germans to stay within Europe after reunification. It was so it was a matter of politics. It was not, and they wanted to keep their mark. So to keep the Deutschmark, you had to give them. We gave a lot to Germany. That's what happened.
Of course. Look, the bankers. The truth is, the bankers in Europe are running everything, and the heads of states are simply accommodating them as best as they can. Which is why they wouldn't admit in Greece, and maybe still don't, that they had to restructure the debt because they didn't want to admit
what they did to Greece.
Of course.
That's where it was revealed. That there is no equivalent of the FDIC in Europe. So there is no equivalent of a Europe-wide protection of debt and insurance or reinsurance of debt in case of default. Every country is responsible for its own debt, but there is one currency. And you look at that and you're like, this is a recipe for madness. And nobody, and instead of implementing that kind of reform, which is highly technical and it's going to be hard to get people behind it or a mass movement behind it because it's highly technical. It's like, it's banking stuff. But instead of having, a sort of mutualization of debt, we just went after Greece. And the way Greece was destroyed, I still don't understand why they made a point of staying in Europe. I still don't understand it. Right. But we're talking about France. But it's
and so back to France though. So you have, for example, in the last 18 years, right? It looks like open-ended contracts have stayed flat at around 1 million, but contracts that are temporary, less than a month, exploded to 4.5 million from 1 million, right? So
it's France's Hartz reforms.
And they don't have unemployment benefits on those temporary contracts. So there's, the invisible hand is screwing people over, right? As much as the state wants.
Invisible.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
I mean, it's the rise of precarious employment is a global trend. This is something that has to do with platforms and the sort of the invention of platforms in part. And the speeding up of the supply chains. And so this is something, it's like the French, like they want to tax Google, and they want to put taxes on social media and stuff like that. Like, it's like trying to plug a hole in a dike and the tide is coming up. I mean, the problems are global, the negative externalities are global, and our institutions, even the transnational ones like the European Commission, are completely outclassed. And I mean, it's the bizarre thing, and it applies to France in that sense, is people say, oh, globalization, the global village and all that. But the reality is globalization feeds off all these discrepancies in jurisdiction, like the jurisdictional arbitrage. Like, for instance, Luxembourg is basically a tax haven, and it's part of the European Union. It makes no sense. Right? I mean, no, and you have like the rich French, like they just locate their LLC equivalent in Luxembourg and all that, and that's just how you do things. So I don't know how I don't know, short of massive. I don't know.
Massive demonstrations for every weekend for months on end. Is that going to help?
Even that? I mean, no, but like, look, and they did actually get some stuff out of it, and there will be reforms, and there will be more care. But the fundamental issues of precarious employment and the transformation in capitalism that are affecting France, because France is a capitalist country that is, very advanced, and it's part of that. These changes, I mean, I'm thinking also the fact that big cities, international cities, are increasingly networked and separated from their milieu and their hinterlands. That globalization of the elite, like, this is not something that is going to change quickly, or I would say that is going to, it's hard to imagine how you do effect change on these things in the normal institutional ways that are essentially national.
I've got maybe as a final question here. It occurs to me, when Syriza was struggling with the Eurocrats in 2015, there were proposals going around that in the extreme, in the event, if push comes to shove, what the Greeks could do is seize the Bank of Greece, which still exists and has the authority to print euros, and basically announce that they're going to use that printing authority to backstop the Greek debt, and basically sort of create by fiat a quasi
second currency,
independent Greek euro within the eurozone, and thereby get out from under the thumb of the European Central Bank. That's difficult for Greece because it's so small and it's so weak, and it was in such an economically precarious situation. It would be a lot easier for a country like France, where you're, a third of the eurozone economy or something, and if you were to just like a new lefty or rightist government, frankly, would probably be more likely to actually try something like this. But
yes,
to just send your troops into the French National Bank and say we're backstopping French debt, and we're not going to care about our debt to GDP ratio anymore, and we're doing a big old stimulus project. What do you think that? I mean, is anybody even talking about that sort of thing? Or otherwise trying to sort of like claw back a little bit of sovereignty to
You do have the right wing does, and Mélenchon.
Really.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting.
What is he up to these days, Mélenchon?
He's embroiled in a power struggle for his own party with another guy who's a filmmaker and very popular, who did a movie on the Gilets jaunes and is also a deputy. So there is a, It's the logic of groupuscule replaying itself once again, which is really a mess because it seems that Mélenchon he did something really impressive, and he got a lot of people behind him, and now they're fighting. Like at the top, they're fighting about it, like in a very Trotskyist way, and there is going to be knives and stuff like that after the European elections, because they're probably not going to do as well as they thought they would or as they should. So that's the problem. Mélenchon he's great. He has great language. He's very charismatic, but the baggage with that is that he's not. He doesn't seem to be the leader for our time. In terms of, I mean, I think he's too into himself, and that's a flaw. That's a flaw. It's a great asset when you're building up. It's very complicated once you get a big thing going, and that's unfortunate. But the people in the party, they're great, and there's a lot of debate going on in there. So hopefully, they'll settle the battle between the big whales, and we can move forward. As to your question about the sovereignty thing, I think, what we need to get to realistically, we need to get into this bargain with Germany again. We need to change the balance of power with Germany and it would help Germany as well, by the way, because ordoliberalism is not great for Germany. So we need to change the balance of power with Germany.
It's almost like the workers of the world need to do something. I forget what. But
yeah, right. I mean, no, but I'm deeply internationalist. I really am. Like,
me too. Yeah.
I mean, it's obvious that there is no solution inside. The only solution inside the confine of the old sovereign states is something that's like fascist adjacent, and it's not. I mean, it might be to the benefit. In the end, it might not benefit you, whom you think it would benefit. So I believe that if we could create something. I mean, I know that Varoufakis and people like that, they've been trying to get that going, and it's been a discussion on the left in Europe for a very long time. How do we create a true transnational left?
Right.
But we still have a lot of work to do. Because see in Spain, for instance, the left has been fractured by the question of Catalonia. In Italy, I don't know where the Italian left is. I don't know what happened to them. And so you have all these. We're in the phase of the tide is ebbing. I guess, is it ebb? Yeah, no, it's retreating. Sorry.
Yeah.
We're in this retreat right now. So it's hard. But at the same time, I think it's a great moment to rethink what's possible and to try to imagine what it would look like, because that's really all we can do.
That's right. So in your political imagination, what's the best and worst outcome of the Gilets jaunes movement?
Worst outcome is Le Pen, And the thing is that Le Pen is like all the people around Le Pen. They're so incompetent, they're clowns. So they're like the Trump people. They're malevolent clowns. They really are. Yeah. So I'm really dreading that. The best outcome would be to actually manage to raise taxes and sort of implement what Piketty wrote for Benoît Hamon and the Socialist Party in the last presidential election. And that the wealth tax would actually be used to transition to renewable energy, which in France, by the way, is very complicated because the nuclear lobby is the state. So they're all ENA, and so I'm talking about something like that would be a sort of ecological, like a green type of platform. The problem in France is that the Green Party is the same as Mélenchon. They spend their time stabbing each other for who's going to be the leader of the groupuscule, instead of creating a mass movement. So that's my hope. I want to believe.
I want you to believe too, because I want to believe.
Live long and prosper.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what could be better than that? It's
Yeah. Let's be optimistic, guys. I'm not. I'm sure you're going to cut that, but
No, we won't. No way. I love that.
That's there's another pogrom, and or attempt at pogrom. It's a clown pogrom. It's that's what they're doing here. I don't understand what's going on. I really hope that Barry Weiss will write an op-ed about how American Jews should consider make Aliyah, because she did that for France. So Barry, if you're listening,
no doubt she is. Yeah.
Oh God! So this was another left-wing manual. You guys need to add a woman here. I would like to talk to a woman as well.
Well, I can only do so much, my friend. But but no, we definitely like to have even more women on the podcast as guests. But I don't know. I think
no, but you guys are fantastic, and there are a few voices out there in writing, but also on podcasts. There are a few voices out there that help us move along. So
thank you, my
friend. We need more,
and thank you for helping us.
I wish I was more committed to that, but I'm still not a citizen, and I wish yes. So I wish I could do more.
Yeah,
you're doing great things. Everyone should buy your book, and that will help you do more because it'll give you lots of good money. So
yeah,
yeah, right.
All the Trekkies, all the Trekkies listening, and all the economic nerds, buy Trekonomics.
Thank you very much, Alexei.
Thank you, my friend. It's been a pleasure.
Namaste, guys.
Yeah, namaste.
Last but not least, we have a friendly reminder that we have a Patreon. You can support the show with $5 a month and get an extra episode every week. We really appreciate the support, and it helps us keep this going.